Okay, so guys, thank you everyone for joining the webinar with a great friend of Students Supporting Israel, our alumna, our president, former president of Columbia University, currently Dalia works at Maccabi Desk Force, and we really appreciate you being here today. So the webinar is recorded, so everyone can watch it later on YouTube as well. And Dalia, thank you for always being there for SSI. We're looking forward to learn from you and hear from you. So we're ready as soon as you are.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ilan, for having me. As Ilan mentioned, my name is Dalia Zahger, and I co-founded Student Supporting Israel at Columbia and was president at some point. I'm going to touch upon that soon enough. But I first of all want to say what a great honor and pleasure it is to speak to my organizational alma mater. So I'm really happy to be here. And I also want to take a moment and recognize the fact that today is the Israeli Holocaust Memorial Day. And that I really hope that through the things that I say today, I am able to encourage some of you to be loud about your activism to Israel, to be loud about your Zionism and what you do. Hopefully give you some tools, some practical things that maybe will help you to do so. And by that, honored this day. And I would like to dedicate this talk to my grandparents who survived the Holocaust, Zichronam Livracha. And let's get started. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to start with a little bit of background about me for those of you who don't know me, so you understand why is it that I'm even talking to you about these things today. Then we're going to talk about persuading for Israel. I'm going to focus specifically on campus, but I really believe that the things that I'm going to talk about are true in every conversation that you have, especially about Israel. And I'm going to talk about what I mean by the 3 whys, the things that might hold you back, tips on how to persuade for Israel, some conclusions, and I'm going to leave some time for questions and answers in the end if anyone has any. So a little bit about me. I grew up in southern Israel in a small town next to Beersheba called Lehavim. I was very active in the Israeli Scouts and youth movements and the young leadership groups. I served in the IDF like every Israeli. I served in the field intelligence unit, both as a soldier and a commander. And all these really shaped who I am, my views today, the choices that I make. I served in Judea and Samaria, and my town in the south used to suffer from rockets every now and then. So these really amplified what I say and what I do today. After my service, I traveled a little bit, but then eventually I moved to New York. I started my bachelor's degree. I co-founded Students Supporting Israel at Columbia University. And today, to continue my work for Israel against anti-Semitism, against BDS, especially on campuses, I chose to work as the Northeast coordinator for Maccabi Task Force. Now let's dive in. So what do I mean when I say persuading for Israel? Israel can be spoken about through every lens. You can present Israel in the humanitarian cause. You can present Israel in the liberal cause. You can present Israel through the tech, through the business, through all of these. And the list goes on, and I'm sure you know it. And in the end of the day, we need to think about how can we make each person think about which one of those lenses can they connect to Israel through, or which one of those can they feel they have something to do with Israel. And we're all persuaders. At some point in your life, you're probably persuaded maybe your parents to get you something you always wanted. Maybe it was a friend to go and eat in the favorite restaurant. Maybe it was a partner to go on a date that you really wanted to go to. So you're definitely all persuaders. We just need to think about how do we implement that for Israel when we engage in these conversations on campus. So what does it mean practically? So for us, I believe it starts with the why. Why do you choose to do what you do for Israel on campus? What moves you to stand for Israel and to have those conversations on campus? What moves you to do those big events, to have those conversations to begin with? I can share with you mine. The first one is personal. When I reached campus and I realized that people like me, who are Israelis, who are former IDF soldiers, are being demonized on a daily basis, and I wouldn't take it. The second is, and it connects to the fact that today is Holocaust Memorial Day, is the fact that when we choose silence, the solution is horrible. The result is horrible. And I know that the Holocaust will never happen again because we do have Israel, but I wouldn't want to wait and see what happens if we remain silent. So I choose to stand up and not stay silent. And the third one is Zionism. Zionism is a value that is so important to me, and it really encompasses so many of the things that I believe in. And I kept seeing how on campus it was being completely changed into something that it's not by people who don't really represent it. So I chose that I want to represent what Zionism is to me. These are my whys. And honestly, it's up to you to decide what your whys are. And then we need to think about what is the end goal. And goals are something that we think we have. We think we put them out there for ourselves and we're good to go. But I think that we can always aim higher. For example, if someone would tell you, and you can try it right now if you want, if someone would tell you to put your hand up as high as you can, and let's say you do, and you can do it right now. Put your hand up as high as you can. And then I would tell you, and then take it a little bit higher. Wouldn't you be able to do that? You probably would. You just need to really try and aim as high as you can and always push for more. So for example, for some of us, the end goal would be to make sure that everyone on campus doesn't necessarily have any bad views about Israel. But is that necessarily the end goal? Wouldn't it be to make sure that everybody has a positive view of Israel on campus? And that's just an idea. It can really be whatever it is that you want it to be. But I want to keep that in mind while we're talking about how do we lead ourselves in these conversations. So as it says, think big, not just about the immediate result of one good conversation, but why do you choose to even go and stand on College Walk or Quad? Now, of course, there are the things that sometimes hold us back. Many of us choose to sometimes step back and not engage in conversation for many reasons. It could be because we're afraid to be asked a question that we wouldn't know the answer to. Maybe we're afraid of confrontation, and this could translate into many things. Maybe it's because no one approached the table today, or maybe it's just because we had a really, really hard day and we're just not into that convoluted conversation about Israel right now. So first of all, I personally experienced all of these, and it's very legitimate. And it's really important to admit which one of those, or maybe it's something that I didn't mention, that you're feeling. It's important to recognize what it is that sometimes holds you back from doing something that really matters to you. And I want you to keep in mind that these goals that you had, these whys that we spoke of, these are much bigger than those situational things that happen to you during the day. They're bigger and they're more important than that. So let that in your mind, make sure it's in your mind when you go on campus so you can push through it. Now, I want to share with you an experience that I had when I felt like I failed a conversation and how I believe I eventually turned it into something good. Well, I was standing on College Walk, and it was during one of our Hebrew Liberation Weeks, which is a week that SSI Columbia basically presents all of the connection between the Jewish people and Israel, the diversity of Israel, Jewish history, the connection between Jews and several minority groups. And one of the displays shows the history and the connection between the African-American civil rights movement and the Jewish people who helped it, and also a little bit about the resemblances there are sometimes between the story of the African-Americans and the Jews. And suddenly I see that there's an African-American grad student who stands next to our display, and she was absolutely outraged with it. When I approached her, I realized that she's very much anti-Israel, but she decided to focus specifically about that display. And she started asking me questions about the display, and I knew how to answer most of them. And we were surrounded by people who were all waiting to see, how am I going to answer that question? What am I going to say? And of course, that always adds pressure. And eventually she asked me that one question about one specific sentence in the display that I didn't know how to answer. Her knowledge about the civil rights movement was much better than mine, which is understandable, I believe. But it was a mistake, and I should have known. So I stood up and I told her, I admit I don't know the answer to your question, But what I do know is that in general, the things that are said here and in the rest of the displays are true, and I stand behind them. And I told her that I would love to meet with her and learn more about what she was just saying. And I hope that she would be able to learn more about what I am trying to represent, so we can actually grow from this together. We exchanged numbers, and I texted her right after, and we exchanged a few messages. 2 days after that, I see her attending an SJP event, which was extremely hateful and anti-Semitic. And as always, when I went, I asked a question in the end to challenge the speaker about the anti-Semitic views that they presented. And the response that I received from the people in the room and the speaker himself was so humiliating, and it was very much dismissive. So eventually, she texted me afterwards, and she told me, I noticed how you were responded to and the way they talked to you, and it was wrong. And it made me realize that something in the whole context of the event was wrong. And I don't think that would have been possible unless I would have the candid conversation with her to begin with, to admit that I don't know, and to be able to show her that I'm very confident about the things that I care about and about the facts of what I do know. So even when you don't know something, even if you do feel like you failed a certain conversation, imagine the worst that can happen, realize it's not that bad, and remember that you can always turn a bad situation into a good one. You can always create a relationship out of it, which will eventually turn into something better. So that's that. Moving to the next thing, which is hopefully the more practical side of this presentation, about how I believe you can persuade for Israel in the best way. And of course, I'm going to give a shout out to SSI Columbia right here, because their picture is right there. And these are my best friends. And Romy, I love you. You're not in this picture, but I love you. Okay, moving on. So first thing you need to do, and it's really important, is prospecting. Who is it that we are talking to? And the idea is, if you understand who it is that you're talking to, if you understand what type of conversation you're going to have, hopefully you're going to be able to understand what is it that you can get them to think, what questions you can ask them to get them to think the things that you want them to get to. And it sounds a little bit complicated, but I'll break it down. If you understand who it is that you're standing in front of by the way they approach you, by the questions that they ask you, or by the tone that they're speaking to you, you can respond appropriately. For example, if someone approaches you yelling at you that Israel is an apartheid state, that you're a genocidal person, or you believe in genocidal beliefs, and these are all things that have happened, then obviously you're not going to have the same type of response or conversation as someone who would approach you with, hey, I see your guys' displays, and I see, let's say, Apartheid Week's displays, and I really don't understand what's going on. Could you maybe explain it to me? That's a different type of conversation. So the first step in order to have a really good and engaging conversation is to understand what type of conversation are you even going to have right now. The second thing is, in order to be persuading in a really excellent way, at least from my experience and what worked for me, it's really important to be really enthusiastic, really sharp, and an expert. And what do I mean by that? Being extremely enthusiastic shows that you're confident about the thing that you love, right? So for example, when we have tables on campus, you see groups tabling. Usually you'll see them sitting behind a table. Maybe sometimes they're gonna tell you something as you pass by about what it is that they're tabling for. Maybe sometimes they're gonna try and hand out a flyer, but usually you don't have people reaching to you and trying to tell you something. So why shouldn't we be those people that are so excited, that are so confident about what it is that we're flyering for, tabling for, that we're gonna reach every single person that passes by us and say, check out this event, check out this group, check out what we do. I think you're gonna love it. That by itself is gonna create a certain thought in the person's mind that you just approach, that you are extremely confident about speaking out for Israel. That says a lot. The second thing is being sharp. And what do I mean by that? It's really important to be present in every conversation that you have. Be attentive to the details, because there are going to be a lot of people around you, especially when you do it outside. It can be very distracting. But when you are in the moment with the conversation, then the person in front of you understands how important this is for you. When you really pay attention, they are going to understand that you're devoting this time for them. And that says a lot. And I want to share a short story. Once again, we were actually in Low Library, which is the stairs that you see in this picture. And we were having Hebrew Liberation Week once again. And a group of anti-Israel people approached us, and they were making some really absurd accusations. And I think Ophir was there with me, actually. There were 3 people from the anti-Israel group, and there were about 3 of us. And naturally, without even planning, because we were able to have these really good conversations, we separated. Each person had one person they were talking to, and we were each having a full-on conversation with that one person. Separating the group allowed us to have a candid conversation with that one person and create a relationship of trust and credibility, even though they don't like us today. But at least during that time that we were talking, they listened. And that's a lot for those of you who try to have conversations with SJPers. And what do I mean by being an expert? Well, no one needs to be a Middle East expert, a history expert, or anything like that. You are, by the fact that you're Israeli, that you're pro-Israel, that you're an SSI activist, you're an expert enough to talk about Israel. Why? Because you're engaged more than 80% more or less of the students on your campus. By being Israeli, it's the fact that you grew up in Israel, so you know so much. By being Jewish, it's the connection that you have and the history that you've learned. By being pro-Israel, it means that you either have been to Israel, maybe you have relatives in Israel, maybe you read and you learned and you took those webinars now that taught you enough to understand that Israel is not an apartheid state, that Israel is not committing an ethnic cleansing, and all those things that we're being accused of. That is more than what a lot of people on your campus know. And by showing your knowledge, by basing your credibility with this knowledge that you have, you're going to create confidence that when you talk, the people who are listening to you are going to trust that there is logic and facts behind what you're saying. And that's a lot. Now, another thing that I feel like is very important is controlling the conversation. In many situations, you're going to have people jumping from one topic to the other, and that happened to me. And they're going to try and move on to the next thing because they have nothing left to say. And that's usually in more antagonizing conversations and conversations where people are trying to blame you or Israel of certain things. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes people are going to ask a question, let's say about the security barrier in Judea and Samaria. And you're going to go into details about why it's there for security, how it affects the mobility of Palestinians, what does it mean on a daily basis. And then they're going to run out of excuses and what to say. So they're going to say, yeah, but what about Gaza? And then it's really important to stop for a second and make them understand, make them think about the fact that they ran out of what to say. And you gave them enough explanations that they don't know how to blame us anymore. So stop and say, Gaza is a different situation. And I'm happy to talk about that as well. But I just want to make sure that you're clear about what we just said about Judea and Samaria, West Bank, or however it is that you choose to call it. I call it in the historical name. So by that, you make them stop and recognize what just happened. And it's really important. Again, we want to engage in an effective way. We want to make sure they get to the same results in their minds as we do. And then 3, I want to make sure we gather intelligence and build a rapport. And that is done by asking questions and giving appropriate anecdotes on why you are a credible and reliable source. And I will share a story about a conversation that I had that I felt was successful. Actually, Shoshi, who's here on this call, was there, and maybe she can share some stories about it as well later. But it was the first time that we had a response for Apartheid Week in Columbia University as SSI Columbia. And I came after class, and 2 girls were yelling at one girl who was an SSI. And I realized that this was a shouting game and it really wasn't going anywhere. So I went in and I started off by saying, first of all, don't shout, don't yell. There's no point. If you want to have a conversation, let's talk. So one of them left because all she wanted to do was yell, and that's fine. But the other one stayed. And I asked her, why are you saying that Israel is an apartheid state? What is it that brings you to that conclusion? And she told me, you have all these discriminatory rules and laws, and that's why that is. So I told her, I would love to know what exactly are you talking about, because I don't know about what laws you're talking about. I don't think Israel's an apartheid state. So tell me, what is it? What rules, what laws? And I said it in this tone that I'm telling you right now. It's really being interested. It's not antagonizing. It's not being angry. It's really, let's talk about it. So she pulls out her phone and she starts, researching and trying to find exactly what it is that she meant. While she was doing that, I told her, look, I grew up in Israel my whole life. I have a neighbor whose last name is Masrawa, who's Muslim Arab. I had a friend in my class whose last name was Abu Shakra, who's Muslim Arab. Her dad actually works with my dad in the same hospital. So I'm not sure exactly what apartheid you're talking to, but these are my experiences, but I'd love to hear. And she nods and she listens. And then she says, oh, here, I meant this law or this rule. And apparently what she found was the rule of committees for entering kibbutzim. For those of you who are not familiar, these are the committees that basically interview people before they're being accepted into a kibbutz. That is done to everyone or anyone who wants to do that. So I told her, if anything, this law makes everyone more equal, because I would need to go through such a committee as well if I wanted to live in a kibbutz. So she concluded by saying, okay, I really have to go. I have a class, but thank you for talking to me. And from being here of shouting and yelling and accusing, we de-escalated to here to where we can both talk and have a conversation. Do I think she loves Israel these days? Probably not. But was I able to get her to a point where she understands that she was so convinced about this law, about this discrimination, and she probably doubts it more now because she's met someone who was able to give her facts, who was able to give her credible source to why it's wrong. And don't get me wrong, the fact that if you're not an Israeli, it doesn't really matter. I can promise you, each of you can think at least of 3 or 4 facts of why Israel is not an apartheid state. For example, the third largest party in the Knesset is the Arab List. There are Supreme Court judges who are Arabs, Muslims, and the list goes on and on. So it's not because I'm Israeli. It's because I was able to get to a point where I'm having a conversation with her. It's not antagonizing. It's not accusing. It's really trying to understand what it is that bothers her so much and change that. So that's my example for that. And I'm going to move on to the conclusions because I really want to leave time for some question and answers if you have those. So I want to remind you, think about your whys. Let those lead you, especially when we get back to campuses. When you go on college walk, when you start engaging with people, recognize the doubts or fears that you have, the things that are holding you back, and put instead of them the whys, because these are much more important and are much more valuable than that's, daily situational fear that you have. And don't forget that if you fail a conversation or two, that's absolutely legitimate. It happens to everyone and to anyone. And the only thing you can do is learn from it. And it's much more important than not trying at all. Always be enthusiastic. We have a great cause to be enthusiastic for. Be sharp, be present, be the expert that you already are. Show it to other people. Gather intelligence, ask the right questions in order to understand who are you talking to, build a rapport. And I also want to say that practice makes perfect. And in a perfect world, I'd love to meet with you guys and maybe try and give you situations that I faced when I was on campus and help you understand what I felt worked best for me in these situations and practice with you guys. So I had my email at the beginning of the presentation. If anyone wants to email me and ask me questions, please feel free to do so. I'd be more than happy to help you guys. But also, you have your friends reach out, have those conversations. They're extremely important. And lastly, I chose to put this picture here, which is from the March Against Anti-Semitism in New York, as a reminder of what it is that we're doing, what it is that we're standing for, and what it is that we're choosing to engage and have conversations about every time that we do that for Israel here in this country. We're making sure that there's no hate and no fear, and that we can walk safely and proudly as Zionist Jews or Zionists in Israel in general. And I really hope that in some way I was able to encourage you to get over some of the doubts or fears, if you have those, and maybe give you some tools about how to engage in the most efficient way when you're on campus. And now, if anyone has any questions, I would love to hear those.
There's questions in the chat.
Okay, let me close the sharing and then I'll probably be able to see it. Awesome. Okay. Can you please tell us what are you doing today in the Israel world? Of course. So today I work for Maccabee Task Force. It's a nonprofit organization that fights BDS on campuses. Basically, we work with groups that are already existing on different campuses across North America and actually now in the world. And we help them think about what's the best strategy to fight for Israel on campus, to stop BDS on campus. And we are supporting the grassroots movements on the campuses themselves in order to promote pro-Israel and anti-BDS conversations. Is there any other questions I can answer?
Dalia, I have a question.
Yeah.
It's a little different than what's happening on campus. It's regarding the incoming freshmen. So when we have events where we bring students on a panel to talk about SSI and the work that you guys do, a lot of times, believe it or not, we get resistance from parents. Parents who say, you know what, college is hard enough. I don't want my kid to get involved. I don't want them to be out there at the forefront of whatever it is that they think in their mind is going on campus as far as hostility towards Jewish students. What can you say to those parents who are worried and want their kids to kind of lay low?
So it would definitely be a very different conversation to have than what I had here if we were talking to, you know, high school students or parents of high school students who are not going to join. But I will say that in the end of the day, anti-Semitism, BDS in all its forms, it's going to get to you. You can't escape it. It never works to put your head down and try and pretend that it's not going to happen or it's not there. So you have a choice to make. You can either try and join and make the pro-Israel, the anti-Semitism force larger and stronger, or you can try and shy away and see in what way is it going to affect you. Because when there's a swastika on campus, it doesn't affect only the pro-Israel Zionist group, it affects everyone. If there is an anti-Semitic statement anywhere, it's going to affect everyone. So you have to make the choice, and you have to understand that when the group is large enough, when the group is united, and they have each other to lean on, and like, as you can maybe tell if you joined it earlier enough in this call, I'm best friends with the people who are with me in SSI Columbia. These are the people who made it possible for me to really go through Columbia in a way that was impactful, in a way that was meaningful. And you can find that in almost every university. And if you can't, then have them reach out to me and I will put them in touch with the right people. But you can't give up, because it will affect every Jewish pro-Israel student at some point or another. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thanks.
Great.
I wonder, Dalia, if I
Yes.
can ask, I don't really know the statistics, and I don't know if they will even post them, but as a person from the inside, as a student here in America, I never studied in America, I'm from Israel, and I don't know what's the levels of, or even any kind of contact and people hitting people and like fights and stuff like this in colleges, and how often or how frequent something like this can happen in a general, basis, not necessarily in only New York City. What do you think about that?
So definitely in Canada, we see more of that than we do in the States, thankfully. Obviously, we'd rather not see it anywhere or at all. But I can tell you that the sense of being concerned is definitely there sometimes. We were in situations when we were like 4 or 5 students and we were surrounded by 50 students who were chanting things against us. So there are definitely intimidating situations. Thankfully, I've never encountered any violence myself, and I know through work that it's not very common as of now. I would never want to wait and see when it does become. And I think that's why it's so important to stand up and do something now and not let it deteriorate, because that's exactly where it's going to go.
Yeah,
But for
especially
now,
today.
yeah.
Especially.
Okay, let me answer a few more questions that we have here in the chat. So Ilana asks, do you have any practical examples of answers to common anti-Israel statements or arguments? Yes, I do. I think the list is long, and I'm sure each individual can give their own examples. Something at the top of my mind, many times, anti-Israel people would come and say, how can you support a state that occupies millions of people? So my response to that would be that I stand for Israel for many more reasons. Israel to me is much more than just the conflict of the Israeli-Palestinian people. So yes, I support Israel because it represents much more than just that to me. But when I do think about the conflict, when I do think about what people refer to as the occupation, I think about it in context and in the context of history and facts. And then I go a little bit into that. But the reason I start with that first part is because I want to make sure their line of thought goes with what I wanted to. I want them to stop and think, Israel is not just about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel is not just about occupation. Israel is much more than that. And it's important to even say it because some people don't realize it when they start having those conversations to begin with. So that would be one example. There are many more, as I said. I'd be happy to meet and have those practical examples a little bit more, but for now, for the time constraints, that's what I can tell you, and I hope to further conversation later on. Naomi asked, how are you working to encourage high school and college kids to do what you have done on campus? Actually, I was lucky enough to have the opportunities to speak in front of high schoolers, to speak in front of seniors in high schools, to talk about what the incredible work that SSI Columbia is doing, what I had the chance to do while I was there, and why it's really important to do that. I hope to continue doing that as I go on, but I mean, SSI Columbia has incredible social media, and besides that, there are so many other organizations that people can learn from, can reach out to, and really understand what's the importance of the work that we're doing. But on my end, I try to talk as much as I can with high schoolers, especially with seniors, to kind of like share with them what's waiting for them and maybe prepare them to the best of my ability. And what is the main difference between Columbia University and other campuses you work with nowadays on college campuses? So Columbia is notoriously known to be anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. I think that there is an inherent problem with some of the professors that are teaching in Columbia. There's a professor who was teaching a class with a book called The Invention of the Jews, claiming the Jews are invented people. There's a professor that continuously posts things on his social media that are extremely anti-Semitic. And people are taking their words as granted when they're listening to their classes. And that creates a continuous problem as students come and go, but they stay. And it's not necessarily unique to Columbia, but it's definitely more prominent there. I think that there are other campuses that are also very anti-Israel. Some campuses are more neutral, and some campuses are actually more pro-Israel. For example, some campuses in Florida are actually really pro-Israel. So yes, it makes a difference where you are. It makes a difference which university you're in. But I would never let that deter anyone's decision on which university to go to, because in the end of the day, you are the change you want to see. If you really want to be in an amazing university, which Columbia University is when it comes to academics, you should go there, and you should really move to see the change in Columbia. You should really do whatever it is that you can to see it as a better university for pro-Israel and Zionist people, which I think with time it's becoming now. So hopefully that answers that question. And Ophir Dayan asked me, who is the best chapter and why? Well, I co-founded Student Supporting Israel at Columbia University, so I do have a warm spot in my heart for them. But now that I work with campuses all over the country, can't tell. But I do love SSI Columbia, of course. And that's all the questions that I see. Am I missing anything? Is there any other questions that I can maybe answer? Okay. Seems.
There is one more no, there is no one more question.
Can I have one more?
Dalia, first of all,
I got Elon. I think we have one more question.
there is
Yeah, please. I would love to. So if you have a specific tactic, you talked before about this specific scenario that the two girls were shouting, and how would you firstly engage in with the, of course, the intention to de-escalate and to make it quiet, but you would just stand there and kind of like look at them and finish listening to them, or would you kind of cut their talk with a specific something you will do, something you say, like if you have any tip about the very first engagement with the people?
Yeah. First of all, I do recognize that sometimes when people are shouting at you, it's not easy to step in and try and de-escalate the situation. Many people are deterred. And the person who asked this question is actually my Krav Maga instructor. So let me say that he's definitely helping me sometimes gain the confidence to step into such situations. But regardless, I will say that it's really important to be able to come and calmly say, while still, making sure that you have some distance just to be on the safe side, but say, don't yell at me. Be someone who is able to stand up and say, if you want to have that conversation, I am here for that, but I will not accept anyone yelling at me. Because in the end of the day, you have the truth on your side, you have the facts on your side, and you shouldn't be shy about what it is that you have to say. And you shouldn't accept anyone yelling at you. You shouldn't accept anyone shouting at you. So be able to stop it and stand up for what you believe in and step into that situation and make sure that you show the confidence for what you believe in. You show the confidence that you have and stop any type of escalation as that, because it's definitely not useful for anything and you don't want it to ever deteriorate into being something worse. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. I think that's that.
awesome. So Dalia, I just want to say a huge thank you, and everything was great except the best chapter answer. However, lately I've been being forced to say that this is the answer by many people, especially. So I want to say
she's learned from the best. I'll just say that.
As long as you know the truth, Elon, we're
the
good.
Columbia people are very persuasive. Let's put it this way.
I mean, isn't this what this is all about?
Yeah. But Dalia, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We'll upload this lecture to the YouTube channel that we have, so more people can see and learn from it. And
come to our events next week.
Will do. If anyone wants my email, if you want to reach out, if you have any more questions, I had it at the beginning of the presentation, but you can also reach out to SSI to ask for it. They have my email, and feel free to reach out and ask any questions if you have those. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dalia.
yeah, we love you, Dalia.
Laugh like she's a medic. Thank you, Dalia.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Toda raba.
Toda.
Thank you, Dalia.
Toda.